In 1818, the East India Company annexed territories in India to form the Bombay Presidency, which was their head center over the rule of South Asia between 1765 and 1947. The British regime's goal was to remake India through administrative or social reform, economic change, and new technologies. Also, they wanted to take over Indian codes of government and replace India's complex patterns of landholding with private property. While Britain was employing imperialism through westernization, it additionally emphasized the power of princes and the elite of India. However, its reforms did not help the following few peoples: the poor, women, and the untouchables, people of a lower caste. Nevertheless, Britain's changes had positive effects as well as negative effects. Although many new jobs were created due to the growth of trade, people were also pushed out of the textile industry because of competition from cheap textile goods. During this period, there was an overall discontent for British rule. For example, there was the Sepoy Rebellion in which Sepoys, Indian soldiers used to enforce British law, revolted. It was the first Indian Revolution during British rule. After this rebellion, Britain eliminated traces of Mughal and Company rule. They oversaw India from London and guaranteed all Indians equal protection of the law and freedom to practice their customs. Britain rule held the tradition of both itself and India, as well as emphasizing the reforms. Then there were the commodities which were exported and imported. Even though many people were in poverty and couldn't afford to feed themselves, the British government made the Indians produce non-food items such as opium and silk. Furthermore, India imported manufactured goods from Britain, which benefited Britain. Imperialistic India was controlled by a powerful bureaucracy known as the Indian Civil Service. Their duty was to go through villages and make their judgments on issues. However, this system excluded Indians and mainly allowed the British to reside in it. Although recruitment was open to anybody, the racist attitudes of the British said so otherwise. But there were also some positive effects to come from this, specifically technological developments, such as railroads, telegraphs, and irrigation systems. In response to Britain's actions, Indian nationalism flourished in the educated middle class. Many Indian intellectuals, such as Ram Mohan Roy and Braham Samaj, looked to Western values and secularism to save India. Some nationalists came together to form the first Indian National Congress, which promoted unity and reform. The National Congress emphasized the rise of nationalism in India and defiance to Britain.
In the 18th century, Europe decided to invade and take over Africa. This was European imperialism. In Africa, once Great Britain found diamond deposits in Kimberley, they annexed the diamond area in 1871, which angered some of the locals called the Afrikaners. Once gold was found in Africa, Britain did the exact same thing and quickly bombarded the Afrikaner Republic of Transvaal. Once British took over these gold and diamond mining areas, they had their own English-speaking white settlers move into these places. The British had many disputes with African tribes and fought them constantly, such as the Xhosa people and the Zulu. The British invaded southern Africa in part by the ambition of Cecil Rhodes, who declared that he would annex the stars if he could. He created the British South Africa Company to push north into Central Africa, where he named two new colonies after himself, Southern Rhodesia and Northern Rhodesia. The British attempts to annex the two Afrikaner republics, Transvaal and Orange Free State, led to the South African or Boer War. The British won this war by bringing in 450,000 troops off seas, but once they created the Union of South Africa, the Afrikaners eventually emerged as a ruling element. Europeans were very oppressive against the Africans and made them do things such as shine their shoes or force them to do whatever they wanted to do because Europeans had advanced technology and guns. Some of the beliefs that led to this oppressive nature from Europeans was the belief in white man's burden and Darwinism. In Africa, there was rich farmland, so Europeans forced the Africans to become squatters, sharecroppers, or ranch hands on land to farm for generations. Some of the effects of European imperialism was that the slave trade died due to British pressure, and trade in other goods grew. The British also introduced industrialization in Africa.
Although Africa's and India's imperialism held few differences, such as their select exportation of goods and level of violence, mainly, both areas held similar characteristics due to them being considered inferior by the British Empire. Imperialism in Africa was vastly similar to imperialism in India. In both areas, the British who imposed rule were forceful and treated the people as lesser beings. British officers truly believed that they were superior due to their racist attitudes towards the Africans and Indians. Furthermore, they viewed it as white man's burden to assist the less fortunate and save them from themselves. Both India and Africa obeyed Britain out of fear due to their advanced technology and army. In equatorial Africa, most of the land was farmland, where Africans produced cash crops and moved the locals to rivers for transport for private companies. They were held at gunpoint and brutalized in these areas, and no one knew about it till the matter was publicized through the press. Europeans were numerous enough to demand self-rule and powerful enough to deny the vote and other civil rights to the majority in South Africa. Also, the Natives Land Act passed, assigning Africans to reservations and forbidding them to own land elsewhere. This led to segregation and oppression in South Africa. Additionally, both territories had valuable resources that Britain forced the inhabitants to collect. Although the people there lived in poverty, British officers demanded that they grow or mine non-food products to increase Britain's wealth. In Africa, Britain controlled the diamond, gold, coal, and cash crops in important places such as Zimbabwe and Transvaal. In India, Britain obtained various goods such as silk, opium, and cotton fiber. But even though Africa and India both suffered at the hands of Britain's imperialistic tendencies, there were some positive changes to come forth. Due to Britain, both areas became industrialized and gained an aspect of Western civilization. India gained the use of railroads, telegraphs, and irrigation systems, as did Africa. Imperialism in these areas led to them being more industrialized in the future. A major theme for imperialism in many areas, specifically India and Africa, is that there may be slight benefits in the future, but they are all at the cost of many detrimental effects to the people and government of those places.
Although European imperialism in Africa and India were very similar in that the Europeans were oppressive and violent towards the people of these continents, there were also differences in the exportations of goods and the level of violence used in each area. In Africa, there are many diamond, copper, iron ore, coal, and gold deposits found, which attracted the British. The British took advantage of these mines and claimed everything found in them. In India, Britain forced the exportation and importation of certain commodities. Even though many people were in poverty, the British government made the Indians produce non-food items such as cotton fiber, opium, silk, and sugar. Furthermore, India imported manufactured goods from Britain. The British were much more violent and oppressive towards the people in Africa than towards the people in India. In Africa, the British constantly fought the Africans in many wars, such as the Boer War and other battles with the Zulu and Xhosa people of Africa. The British would force Africans to do whatever they wanted, such as polish the shoes or grow whatever they wanted. Some of the worst abuses occurred in the Congo state, where a rubber boom made it profitable for private companies to brutalize Africans collecting latex from vines that grew in forests. These Africans were beat multiple times and faced many violent abuses from the British. The British were not as violent with the Indians. In India, the British made racist comments toward the Indians and made them grow certain foods. This was not nearly as violent as the treatment of Africans by the British.